I didn't plan to blow up 30 years of marriage in a single morning. But there I was standing in the oak-paneled courtroom in DuPage County, listening to my wife Sarah's attorney demand half of everything I'd earned, including the Minerva Trust. The same trust she never knew existed. The same trust worth $50 million. When the judge leaned forward, tapping his pen, the whole room went dead quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat, heavy and slow. Sarah looked at me with that brittle confidence she'd perfected over the years, the kind that said she believed she'd already won. She had no idea what was coming. That was the moment everything finally snapped into place, the 30 years of trust, the paper she pushed across our kitchen table, the children who suddenly wouldn't return my calls. All of it had led to this one point, and when my lawyer, old Tom Smith from Downers Grove, stood up with a thick binder under his arm, I knew the truth was about to hit her harder than any betrayal had hit me. But to understand how all of us ended up in that courtroom, with decades of love, loyalty, and lies piled between us, you need to know where it all started. I'm Richard Miller, 62 years old, retired software engineer, born and raised in Oak Park, Illinois. Same brick Tudor house since 1989, corner of Ridgeland and Lexington. A neighborhood where folks still shovel each other's driveways after a snowstorm, and you wave at the same mailman for 20 years. I met Sarah back when I was 28 at a 4th of July barbecue hosted by the Williams family across the street. She was 26 then, dark blonde hair, a bright summer dress, and a smile that could thaw Lake Michigan in February. She laughed easily, more easily than I did, but I liked that about her. She made the world feel warm. We married fast 10 months after that barbecue. Too fast, maybe, but when you're young and certain you're doing everything right, warning signs look a lot like fireworks. I was making decent money writing code for a tech company in Schaumburg back when tech jobs didn't come with beanbags and kombucha taps. Just gray cubicles, stale coffee, and people like me who kept their heads down and got things done. Sarah handled the finances from day one. It wasn't my idea, not really. When we were planning the wedding, she mentioned almost shyly that numbers overwhelmed her. Budgeting stressed her out. She said she'd be grateful if I could take that weight off her. So I did. But a few months and something changed. She told me she'd been thinking about it and wanted to manage the checkbook to learn and improve. She looked proud when she said it, brave even. I like seeing that side of her. So I let her take over, and I didn't look back. I didn't know then that this tiny shift would turn into 30 years of blind trust, 30 years of never checking a statement, 30 years of assuming no believing that Sarah and I were on the same team. Our life was simple and good. 2 kids, David and Emily, soccer on Saturdays, church on Sundays, birthday cakes from the Jewel Osco bakery, summers spent grilling in the backyard, while kids from the block ran through sprinklers like they didn't know how fast childhood disappears. Year 2 of our marriage, I added Sarah's name to the deed of the house. The place had been my parents' before they downsized to a condo in Oak Brook. Paid off in full, solid roof, good bones. I wanted Sarah to feel secure, equal, like this was her home as much as mine. When I told her, she burst into tears, happy ones, or at least I thought they were. Neighbors used to call us the perfect couple, and for years I believed them. If only they'd seen the cracks forming long before I did. The night everything changed didn't come with thunder or shouting or slammed doors. It came with pot roast. A plain old Tuesday evening in our Oak Park kitchen, the same one with the honey-colored cabinets we refinished in '97, the same clock on the wall that ticked a little too loudly after the kids moved out. I was setting out plates when Sarah walked in, holding a manila folder against her chest like it was a newborn or a bomb. Hard to tell which. She didn't sit, didn't make small talk, didn't even look at me. She just slid a single sheet of paper onto the table. I thought maybe it was something from the insurance company, or a form from her mother's doctor. Something mundane, something ordinary. That's how betrayal likes to dress: plain clothes, neutral tone. "Richard," she said quietly, "I need you to sign this." I picked it up. A waiver. A legal document stating that any inheritance Sarah might receive from her parents, specifically the farmland in Kankakee, would remain her sole property, and I would have no claim to it in the event of divorce or death. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was confusion, thick and heavy. Why now, I asked, trying to keep my voice even, after 30 years. She fiddled with her wedding ring. Sarah always did that when she was nervous. A woman should protect herself, she muttered. My sister's going through a terrible divorce. You never know what could happen. Protection, I repeated. From whom? She winced, barely but enough. This is just smart, Richard, she said. Something responsible couples do. Responsible couples, funny choice of words considering I was hearing this for the first time after decades of handing her every paycheck, every statement, every PIN number. I didn't even know the password to our bank account anymore. Sarah changed it for security a couple of years back, and I didn't question it. But something in that moment, the way she stood stiffly, the way her voice thinned, made a cold, unfamiliar thought creep into my chest. She doesn't trust you. I tried to shake it off. Maybe something had spooked her. Maybe her sister's divorce had gotten into her head. Maybe this was just fear talking. So I asked her gently, Sarah, look at me. Do you think I would ever take something from you? She didn't answer. The silence pressed in around us, thick as the winter air that seeped through the old windows. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like I was standing across from a stranger, wearing my wife's face. Richard, she whispered, just sign it. Don't make this into a thing. Don't make this into a thing. That line hit me in the chest like a hammer. I sat down, picked up the pen. The pot roast was starting to burn, sending the smell of charred onions through the house. Sarah didn't turn off the oven. She didn't seem to smell it at all. My hand actually trembled. 62 years old former engineer, steady as they come, and I was shaking like a boy facing his first test. I signed slowly, not because I doubted the signature, but because with every stroke of the pen I felt 30 years of trust peeling away like old wallpaper. When I slid the paper back to her, she let out a breath, relief, not gratitude. And that was the moment something inside me went cold and still. I'll be filing for divorce tomorrow, I said. Sarah froze. Her fork hovered midair, pot roast forgotten. What, Richard? No, you're overreacting. No, I said quietly, I'm finally reacting. Her eyes filled not with sorrow, but with fear, a different kind of fear than I'd expected. I stood up, turned off the oven, and walked to the hallway without looking back. It wasn't until I lay awake in the guest room that night, staring at the ceiling fan, slowly turning, that a new thought settled into me, one heavier, darker, and far more painful than the paper she'd handed me. She's been preparing for this longer than I have. The next morning didn't feel like the start of a divorce. It felt like the start of winter. Not the kind you track on the calendar, the one that creeps quietly into the corners of a house, settling into the walls, stiffening the air, turning every room cold even when the heat is on. That was the winter Sarah and I walked into. We didn't fight, we didn't scream, we just stopped speaking. At first I tried to keep things civil. I made coffee like I always did. Put her mug on the counter, white ceramic with chip on the handle. After 30 years I could place it with my eyes closed. She didn't touch it. Instead, she walked past me with a stiffness in her shoulders that felt like a slammed door. By the afternoon, she'd moved into the master bedroom and placed my shaving kit on the hallway table. Not thrown, placed. The kind of placement that says a whole lot more than yelling ever could. I moved to the basement that night. Fold-out bed, thin blanket, the faint smell of cardboard from the storage boxes. Every footstep Sarah took upstairs drifted down to where I lay, sharp as taps from a judge's gavel. On the third day, things escalated in a way I wasn't prepared for. David, our son, called. Normally when he called, he'd say, "Hey, Dad, how's my favorite old man?" But that day his voice was flat, stiff. "Dad, Mom told us you threatened to leave her with nothing." My stomach dropped. "What, David, that's not. She said you signed a prenup yesterday, or post-nup, something like that." "No," I said firmly. She handed me a document. I didn't hand her anything. Silence. Then, "Dad, why didn't you tell us there was money, real money?" So Sarah had started talking. "How much has she told you?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. "That you've been hiding things," David said. "That you might try to cheat her out of the house, out of the inheritance." A bitter taste filled my mouth. Anger, disappointment, grief all rolled into one. "David," I said carefully, "your mother's afraid of something. But it isn't me. And I have never not once hid money from her." Another silence. He wasn't sure whether he believed me. "We'll talk later, okay?" he said before hanging up. Emily didn't call at all. The quiet war had started. Sarah told the bridge club that I had changed. She told her sister I'd become calculating. She told neighbors she wasn't safe with me handling finances. Safe, that word stung the deepest. Within a week, I wasn't just the man sleeping in the basement, I was the villain in a story I didn't even know she'd been writing. But the biggest blow came the following Monday. I sat in my old Buick in the parking lot outside Smith & Daniels Law Group, gripping the steering wheel, telling myself I was doing the right thing. I'd known Tom Smith since he drafted my parents' estate plans 25 years ago. If anyone could help me navigate this mess, it was him. Tom stared across his oak desk at me as I told him everything at Sarah's request. The waiver, the silence, the shift in our home. When I finished, he leaned back, rubbed his jaw, and exhaled. Richard, he said slowly, a divorce at your age. It's not simple, not financially, not emotionally. I'm aware, I said. And Sarah's not going to go down easy. I've known her a long time. She's determined. I almost laughed. You're telling me. Tom folded his hands. Let me ask you something. Does she know about the Minerva Trust? No, I said. I never told her. His eyebrows lifted. That's significant. But he added, lowering his voice, this won't be an open and shut case. Her attorney will argue she contributed indirectly to your career, that she managed the household, that the trust grew during the marriage growth that could be considered marital. So what does that mean, I asked. It means, he said, we need every scrap of documentation you have. Statements, letters, tax forms, originals if possible. A separate property trust can be protected. But if there's any sign of mixing funds, you could lose a chunk, maybe a big one. I felt the room tilt slightly. $50 million. The legacy my parents built, the safety net they hoped would protect our family. I'll get the documents, I said. And that night in the cold basement, I started digging through every dusty box, envelope, and file I had, searching for proof of my own innocence. The basement became my battlefield. Not a noisy one, no shouting, no anger. Just the low hum of the old dehumidifier and the soft scrape of cardboard boxes being pulled across concrete. I spent hours down there, sorting through 30 years of papers, chasing a trail I didn't realize I'd need until it was almost too late. Old tax returns, banking envelopes with outdated logos, brittle copies of statements printed on dot matrix paper, tiny pieces of my past I hadn't touched since the kids were in elementary school. I needed everything. Every scrap that proved the Minerva Trust had been built long before marriage and untouched afterward. But the basement wasn't the hard part. The hard part was the silence above me. 2 weeks into the divorce process, I realized Sarah wasn't just building a case, she was building a narrative. One where she was innocent, and I was the cold, calculating husband who'd spent decades hiding money. I didn't hear the story from her. I heard it from the outside. The first hit came at the Jewel Osco, Oak Park's unofficial town square. I was reaching for a loaf of bread when Linda Matthews, our neighbor for 20 years, looked at me like I'd tracked mud across her kitchen. Richard, I'm so sorry about everything, she said, her voice dripping sympathy. Sarah's been just devastated. She said she never imagined you'd, well, keep secrets like that. The loaf of bread suddenly felt heavy in my hands. Secrets. That word stung more than liar, more than cheater. Secrets meant I had done something deliberate, something sneaky. Linda, I said quietly, I didn't. She cut me off with a sad, knowing nod. You don't have to explain to me, dear. I know how marriages can get. She didn't know anything. That was the problem. By the time I got home, something inside me had settled into a cold, steady ache. And then came the second hit. Emily, my daughter, finally called. Dad, she said stiffly, we need to talk. Hearing her voice should have been a relief. It wasn't. I'm glad you called. She didn't let me finish. Why didn't you tell Mom about your trust? Her tone wasn't angry. It was scared, like she'd just found out her father was a stranger. Emily, I said I didn't tell her because it was separate, and it was supposed to be a safety net for all of us long term. My parents wanted. So you hid it, she said, her voice cracking slightly. Dad, I don't even know what to think right now. Mom's a mess. No, Sarah wasn't a mess. She was preparing for war. Emily, listen to me. Your mother isn't telling you the whole story. Then tell me, she whispered. But I couldn't, not yet. Not with the documents still scattered across the basement, not with the case half built, not with the trust hanging by a thread. I needed to protect myself first, even if it meant letting my kids sit in the dark a little longer. I will, I said softly. Just give me time. When she hung up, I sat on the basement steps for a long while, head in my hands, feeling 62 and ancient. Later that week, Tom called. Richard, we got the discovery notice from her attorney, he said. They're asking for full financial transparency for the last 30 years. Every account, every deposit, every withdrawal. I swallowed hard. That's normal, right? For a contested divorce involving a large asset, Tom said. Yes, but they've also filed a motion to temporarily freeze all distributions and transactions related to the Minerva Trust. The air left my lungs. Tom, can they do that? For now, yes, it's temporary, but it means one thing: Sarah's lawyer knows there's real money involved. A sharp pressure pushed into my ribs. The trust wasn't just at risk, it was under attack. Tom continued, do you have the original trust document? I'm looking, I said. I found the first set of statements and some tax filings, but the original is somewhere. You need it, Tom said plainly. Judges don't like uncertainty. If her lawyer can convince the court that the trust's growth came from marital contributions, they might carve off a piece, maybe a big piece. How big, I asked. 30 to 40%, he said, maybe more. Silence. I stared at the basement shelves, boxes labeled with years' kids' school projects, old manuals for appliances that didn't exist anymore. Somewhere in that maze was the document that could save me, or doom me. After Tom hung up, I sat on the cold floor for a long time, not crying, not angry, just tired. But that night, as I dug deeper through the paperwork, I found something, a letter from my father, written in 1994, congratulating me on setting up the Minerva Trust. His handwriting was strong, steady, filled with pride. I held the letter against my chest for a moment. Dad, I whispered, I'm trying. Because now it wasn't just about money. It was about not letting the worst version of myself, unseen, unheard, unprotected, become the truth Sarah painted. And God help me, I wasn't going down without a fight. The morning of the hearing felt like stepping into a freezer, not because of the October chill outside, but because of the silence inside me, a silence that had settled deep in my bones after weeks of digging through paperwork, fielding half-truths from my kids and hearing whispers around the neighborhood. DuPage County Courthouse sits on a broad stretch of asphalt in Wheaton, a squat brick building that looks more like a high school than a place where futures get decided. I parked my old Buick at the far end of the lot. I needed a minute before walking inside. Tom met me near the entrance binder under his arm scarf, tucked neatly into his overcoat. He looked steady, calm, like a man who had walked into storms bigger than mine. You ready? He asked. As ready as I can be, I said. Inside the courtroom, everything smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. The walls were paneled with dark wood that felt heavy with secrets. A few people sat on the benches, strangers mostly. But in the second row, I spotted someone who wasn't a stranger at all. Emily. My daughter sat with her hands folded in her lap, eyes dim, looking smaller than she had since she was 12. And beside her, my son, David, jaw clenched tight. They looked torn, pulled between loyalty and confusion. I gave them a faint nod. Only Emily returned it. Sarah walked in moments later. She wore the navy suit she only brought out for funerals and job interviews. Her hair was neatly done makeup, soft eyes already glassy. If I hadn't known her better, I might have believed she was frightened, heartbroken, overwhelmed. But I did know her. And I knew when someone was performing. Her attorney, Mark Denning, a slick man from Naperville with perfect hair and a voice like a car commercial, leaned in to whisper something to her. She nodded, dabbing her eye with a tissue. Tom leaned toward me. Remember, he said quietly, they're going to make you look cold. Don't react. Let the facts speak. The judge entered, a tall man with silver hair and a face that looked carved from stale bread. Judge Rourke. Fair but not sentimental, the kind of judge who valued paperwork more than tears. After introductions, Denning stood and launched straight in. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Sarah Miller, devoted 30 years of her life to this marriage. She raised their children, managed their home, handled the finances, while Mr. Miller pursued a lucrative career. I kept my face still. Denning continued. Only recently did she discover that Mr. Miller has been hiding a significant asset known as the Minerva Trust, which he failed to disclose for decades. We will show that the trust's value grew substantially during the marriage and that such growth is a marital property. He emphasized the last two words like he was slamming a door. I felt a flicker of heat climb my neck. Hiding, I had never hidden a dollar, but lies dressed in legal language have a way of sounding legitimate. Denning held up a stack of documents. We request the court consider awarding Mrs. Miller a fair portion of that growth given her contributions to the marriage. The judge turned to Tom, Mr. Smith. Tom stood, buttoned his jacket, and stepped forward with the slow confidence of a man who'd done this for 4 decades. Your Honor, my client never hid anything. The Minerva Trust was created in 1994 entirely from premarital assets. No marital funds ever entered that trust. We have documentation to prove all this. He placed the binder on the table with a soft thud. But he continued, we acknowledge the court's responsibility to review all circumstances. And so we submit full records of its creation, its original funding, and its independent management. The judge flipped through a few pages, then looked at me. Mr. Miller, he said, why did you not disclose the trust to your wife for all these years? The room went still. Even the air felt like it stopped. I swallowed. My parents asked me to keep it as a safety net for the family, I said quietly. Not for spending, not for daily use, for the long term. It wasn't about secrecy, it was about responsibility. A long pause. Denning smiled like a man who'd been waiting for that exact answer. He pounced. So it was hidden, he said. Your wife had no knowledge, no access, no control. She could not benefit in any way. I clenched my hands under the table, forcing myself not to respond. He continued, we argue that such deliberate exclusion, combined with the trust's substantial growth, creates grounds for equitable division. My stomach tightened. This was the moment Tom warned me about. The moment where the judge could decide that the trust's growth, tens of millions, was marital property. Judge Rourke pressed his lips together deep in thought. He looked between me, Tom, Sarah, and the stack of documents on his desk. For the first time since the divorce began, I felt real fear. Not fear of losing money, fear of losing the last thing my father left to me. Then Tom stood again. Your Honor, he said, if I may redirect your attention to page 12. He opened the binder. Photocopy of the original trust deed, date stamped, signatures, bank verification. This document has never changed, Tom said. Not in 30 years. No additions, no marital income, no commingling. The growth is simply the natural growth of the original fund. Judge Rourke adjusted his glasses. What about withdrawals, he asked. None, Tom answered. Not a single one. Another long silence. Denning shifted in irritation. Sarah dabbed her eyes harder. The judge finally spoke. I will review this carefully, but understand this trust status is not as clear-cut as either side believes. We will continue tomorrow. He banged the gavel lightly. And just like that, the hearing ended. But as I walked out of the courtroom past my children's conflicted faces, past Sarah's tight, trembling smile, one thing became unmistakably clear. I wasn't walking into victory. I was walking into a war. I barely slept that night. I lay awake in the basement, my temporary bedroom, listening to the furnace click on and off, feeling the weight of the courtroom settle on my chest like a cinder block. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Judge Rourke's face, thoughtful, unreadable, a man deciding whether the last thing my parents left me would survive the storm. Morning light leaked through the small basement window, pale and cold. I made coffee upstairs, careful not to make a sound. The house felt hostile now, like it recognized what was happening and didn't approve. At 9, Tom called. Richard, he said, I've gone through everything you sent me. Bring the originals, all of them. They're in my car, I said. I'm on my way. When I arrived, Tom's office was already buzzing. Paralegals moving like bees, printers spitting out papers, someone talking about a deposition down the hall. But when Tom opened his door, the noise faded behind me. Have a seat, he said, motioning to the chair across from his desk. I need you to see this. He slid forward the photocopy of the original trust deed, my father's signature, my signature, 1994, 2 years before I married Sarah. This is strong, Tom said, very strong, but not perfect. That turned my stomach. Not perfect, I repeated. Her attorney is arguing indirect contribution, Tom said. 30 years of domestic support, child-rearing, household management. He'll say those freed you to build your career, which allowed your pre-marital investments to appreciate. I ran a hand over my face. So what are the odds? I asked quietly. Tom straightened his glasses. If the judge buys their argument, you could lose 20, maybe 30%. But if he accepts our evidence, you keep every penny. Every penny suddenly felt too fragile to hang a life on. Tom tapped the binder. The original deed helps. The untouched structure helps more. And this, he reached into a separate folder and pulled out the letter I'd found from my father. This is gold. I swallowed hard. I'd forgotten Tom even had it. Written in my father's strong handwriting, this trust is for the Miller legacy, Richard. Protect it. Never let it get tangled where it doesn't belong. My father had died 19 years ago. Seeing his words in that office felt like having him sit beside me again, steady and resolute. Tom looked at me. This shows intention. Judges care about intention. I nodded, unable to speak. When we walked into court that afternoon, I felt something shift, not victory, not confidence, but a sense of clarity, like stepping into a storm with a good coat. You still feel the wind, but it doesn't bowl you over. Sarah and her attorney were already seated. Denning gave me a tight smile, half pity, half threat. Sarah didn't meet my eyes. Judge Rourke took his seat. Mr. Smith, he said, you may proceed. Tom stood open the binder and began laying out the evidence piece by piece. Dates, signatures, archived, bank certifications, early statements showing the seat amount. He walked through it slowly, methodically. Not dramatic, just factual. Then he held up the letter from my father. Your Honor, Tom said gently, this demonstrates not only the origin of the trust, but the intent behind it. It was created to preserve family assets, not to shield marital property. Denning scoffed. A letter from his father anyone could write. Counselor, the judge warned sharply. Tom continued, there is no record of withdrawals, no marital contributions, no mixing of funds. This trust is by every definition separate property. The judge looked at Denning. Your response. Denning stood stacking his papers with a crisp smack. We do not dispute the trust's origin, we dispute its growth. Mrs. Miller's contributions to the marriage allowed Mr. Miller to maintain premarital investments. That growth is marital property. Sarah dabbed her eyes. Perfect timing. Judge Rourke leaned back, steepling his fingers. The room tightened. Then he spoke. I find that the Minerva Trust is indeed separate property. Sarah jerked as though someone had slapped her. But the judge continued, I will award Mrs. Miller a disproportionate share of the marital estate given the duration of the marriage and her contributions. Mr. Miller will retain full ownership of the trust, but will provide reasonable spousal maintenance for a defined period. Sarah's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The gavel struck. That was it. The war was over. No cheering, no gasps, just the hollow echo of the gavel and the quiet collapse of 30 years. When we stepped out into the hallway, Tom exhaled. You did it, he said. No, I replied, I survived it. He nodded softly. Sometimes, Richard, that's the victory. As I walked toward the exit, I passed my children. David looked unsure. Emily's eyes were teary. Dad, she whispered we didn't know. I stopped, met her eyes. I know, sweetheart, it's okay. But inside I felt the bruise of every moment they believed the worst of me. Outside, the October wind cut through my jacket, sharp, honest. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Not joy, not triumph. Just peace. I didn't go home right away after the ruling. Home didn't feel like home anymore. Not the house itself. Those old brick walls had held decades of birthdays arguments, Christmas mornings, and quiet Sunday evenings. But the atmosphere inside, the warmth I used to feel when I turned onto our street, had thinned into something cold and unfamiliar. So instead I drove down Roosevelt Road, past the Jewel Osco where Linda Matthews had given me that pitying look, past the park where David learned to ride his bike, where Emily scraped her knee so hard she swore she'd never climb monkey bars again, past the church where Sarah and I said our vows, words that felt honest at the time, maybe even sacred. I kept driving until I reached the little pond near Thatcher Woods. I parked under a half-bare oak tree and watched the water ripple with the wind. Ducks floated near the bank. A jogger passed by and nodded. Life went on, utterly indifferent to mine. It struck me then painfully but cleanly that sometimes life doesn't take a chunk out of you all at once. Sometimes it scrapes little pieces over time so slowly you don't notice until you're lighter than you ever meant to be. And then a strange thing happened. My phone buzzed. It was David. I stared at the name for a good 10 seconds before answering. Dad. His voice was hesitant, softer than it had been in weeks. Are you okay? I exhaled. I'm all right. We read the documents, he said quickly. Mom never told us about the paper she gave you, the waiver, or how she'd been talking to a lawyer before any of this started. Another scrape, I thought, another little piece of truth revealed. She was scared, I said carefully. People do strange things when they're scared. Still, he said, we should have asked you first. I'm sorry, Dad. I closed my eyes. The wind pushed cold air through the cracked window, smelling faintly of damp leaves. Thank you, I whispered. That means more than you know. He sighed. We'd like to see you, Emily too. For the first time in months, warmth crept into my chest. A small warmth, but real. I'd like that, I said. We hung up, and I sat back, letting the moment settle. Later that afternoon, I returned to our house, though, not for long. Sarah was in the kitchen packing dishes with a kind of rigid precision. She didn't look up. The movers will come Friday, she said. My lawyer will handle the rest. I nodded. There was nothing left to say. Maybe once upon a time, I would have felt anger or victory or something sharp enough to cut through the numbness. But the truth was simpler, quieter. I didn't hate Sarah, not even after everything. I felt tired and sad and strangely free. We stood in silence for a moment, the distance between us wider than the entire length of the kitchen. Then I walked away, not out of cruelty, just finality. A week later, I moved into a small apartment overlooking the river in downtown Oak Park. Nothing fancy. Second floor, worn carpet, a balcony just big enough for a chair and a cup of coffee. But it was mine, every square foot of it. I hung my father's letter on the wall, a reminder not of the money but of intention, of protection, of legacy. And one evening, just as the sun dipped behind the buildings and turned the river gold, I rewrote the Minerva Trust with a new clause. Everything goes to David and Emily, nothing to Sarah, not now, not ever. I didn't do it to punish her. I did it to end the story properly, to close the door she had already shut. A few days later, I cooked myself dinner. Just one plate, one fork, one glass. It felt strange at first, then grounding. And as I sat there, 62 years old, divorced, a little worn, but still standing, I realized something. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet reclaiming of your life after someone tried to rewrite it. Sometimes winning simply means getting yourself back. And if you've listened all the way to this point, if any part of this hits somewhere, deep somewhere, private, then maybe you know what I mean. If this story felt familiar, if it brushed against something you've carried in silence, I want you to send me just 3 words. I felt that. I read every message. This is Richard Miller. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourself, and good night.